Well over 5 years ago, when I first started making MGTOW content, the landscape of YouTube, and indeed the internet, was quite different. MGTOW as a phenomenon was rather fringe, rather unheard of. Nobody really talked about it, and things have changed quite a bit since then. Many things have changed, but many things have stayed the same. Certainly, most people on the internet are familiar with the concept of MGTOW, and the numbers of men calling themselves men going their own way have increased. But of course, there's also been fracturing, factionalism, and all sorts of things related to that. But I want to talk about the primary differences between then and now, and the primary similarities. And I also wish to mention that we have a long way to go as far as understanding things is concerned. Now, back in the day, there weren't too many content producers. I'm not saying that's good or bad, merely that's the way it was. There was the late man-woman myth, the now from YouTube departed Barbarossa. There was me, and there were some early videos by Girl Writes What, although obviously she's not a man. But it was quite a dynamic time, and I think one of the most important things the small MGTOW community did, and the content producers of the time did, was contrary to what was then a very strong current in the ocean of ideas, and believe me, it remains today, and I'll be talking about that a bit more. What we did was to identify organic causes and organic effects as the key, or rather the keystone, to understand in the mystery of human behavior, specifically male and female behavior. Back then, as is often the case now, people tended to posit political ideas. We ran, of course, into some conflict with people such as Blocky Mystery and Bernard Chabin, people who are staunch, quote-unquote, anti-leftists, or whatever that means, and the meme of cultural Marxism or neo-Marxism or the Frankfurt School and all of this stuff. This was quite prominent then, and believe it or not, it remains prominent today. But I think the most important contribution those early content producers made was to posit an organic nature, an organic cause and effect to understanding human nature. Now, it's not that we completely discounted politics or political theories or ideas, just that we recognize and acknowledge that ultimately political ideas act upon individuals from the outside, from without, as opposed to from within. And there's always a human nature that's constantly at work interacting with the environment. And the best means of understanding what's going on is to understand that human nature and how it interacts with the environment. And that environment can indeed be political. But back then, and it remains the case today, many, many individuals were convinced that it's all political. And there are a number of reasons for that. Now, not too long ago, I was listening briefly to a chat between some semi-known anti-feminists. Some of them were this Skeptor person. Another one is Naked-Ape, who has an oddly similar portrait to mine, me being a gorilla. And some Scottish guy, I believe, called Six or Goodfellow. And they spent a fair amount of time in a state of puzzlement as to why women are divorcing, why they have divorced, and what changed. And one of the conclusions was that, women used to be fundamentally different. And this isn't the first time I've heard things in the year of the risen fictive figure, Jesus, 2016. People, even 5 years, more than 5 years after the fact, are still in a state of bewilderment and confusion as to what motivates people, men and women, to behave certain ways. And they still favor politics as a causal explanation, a primary explanation, rather than going back to the basics, that is, human nature. What drives male reproduction? What drives female reproduction? I often, well, not often, but sometimes I'll engage some of these individuals in comment sections. You have no idea how often I've heard the idea that the Frankfurt School, a rather obscure neo-Marxist school of thought originating in Frankfurt, Germany, no surprise, has somehow transformed Western society and indeed the world. Now, these individuals are firmly convinced, for example, that someone like Jürgen Habermas or Adorno or any of these other gentlemen, these German thinkers, were somehow involved in transforming the face of society and somehow, in a way that's wholly inexplicable, tricking women into the types of behavior we see today. Now, this has been refuted many, many times, but it bears mentioning again. What sounds more plausible? The bored housewife in California who resents her husband for working overtime in order to support her and her children, having an affair and fucking him over, resenting him for his greater ability to earn, at the same time for not being present to pay attention to her. Well, is that an organic thing? Is it born of her own psychology and her own needs and wants and desires? Or did she spend all that time at home reading the last 10 publications of Jürgen Habermas in order to familiarize herself with the so-called Frankfurt School of Thought? What's more probable? In the late 90s, that a nervous and worried Korean housewife divorces her husband due to the financial crisis because she's worried about her sustenance and her well-being and future, or she was dabbling in the tomes of Erich Fromm. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who spends any time with this that it's not the Frankfurt School or any other political school that's tricking women and conning women into certain types of behavior. It is organic. It is women interacting with their environment. Another of the important things that we've done throughout the years, at least certain sectors of the quote-unquote MGTOW community, is to identify human universals, which is to say, not just look at the West, but look at other places, such as India and other parts of Asia, such as South Korea, Japan, China, Latin America. And we find just remarkable similarities across the board. So one of the ideas that we were able to get rid of quite quickly, and it's an illusion that persists today, or rather a delusion, is that women are somehow different and possess different psychologies depending on their quote-unquote culture or their country. That it would, this myth of, say, the submissive Asian housewife or some nonsense such as that. Well, we haven't only just dispelled that myth and refuted it. It's testified in numerous correspondences I've had over the years. You have no idea how many, probably it's ranking in the dozens now, private messages I've received from men who married Korean women, Chinese women, Indonesian women, essentially your prototypical submissive Asian housewife, brought them home to places such as Canada and Australia, and lo and behold, they become harpies, and they end up divorcing them and taking them for all they had. Now, whatever happened to the differentiated psychology? We don't understand what happened, and what happened was quite simply that women have a specific psychology. It is universal for the most part, and it interacts with the environment, and depending on a shift in the environment and what type of environment she finds herself in, she will react accordingly. So in an incredibly restrictive society like South Korea, yeah, she'll behave a certain way, but you only need to remove the curtains just a little bit and shift the environment just a little bit, and all of a sudden you could be dealing with an entirely different beast. So this is another important thing that we identified early on, that there are human universals in behavior. And this is work that I've continued, to this day, fairly recently, a couple of months back, with pumpkin spice latte and Neolithic hypergamy. Now, these people who constantly posit political theories and ideas and conspiracies would have you believe that the so-called Frankfurt School, as an example to bring it up again, they weren't only just boring and theoretical academics and literati. In fact, they were time machine inventors, because apparently, according to them, although they've never spelt it out, these people have journeyed back about approximately 8,000 years in the Neolithic to prevent a large subsection of the male population from reproducing with their corkscrew theories. Or did they? So I think by now most people in the MGTOW community are well aware of the organic cause and effect and the organic nature of human behavior. It's always the environment interacting with that nature. And rather than a sort of top-down theory of how politics changes everything, politics is more a slightly additive element than it is anything else. It's not to completely discount certain things. No doubt academia has been totally inundated with political correct garbage, particularly of the quote-unquote cultural Marxist school, but that doesn't explain individual female behavior, and it doesn't explain the universality of female behavior across the board. And I think only the most lunatic of these so-called conspiracy theorists would posit that bored housewives in Brazil and India and South Korea and California and Vancouver and just all over the world are reading Adorno or Habermas or whatever. That's just silly. Or for that matter, Das Kapital. I mean, let's be serious here. But the question remains why people, in light of all the evidence that has been brought forth that there is a human nature, that's understandable, that it can be analyzed, that we can find cause and effect, and it all is linked to the different reproductive needs of men and women, why they cleave to such ideas with such intransigence and unrelenting vigor and fervor. And I think there are two primary reasons for this. One is, human beings are quote-unquote pattern-seeking creatures. That's true, but that doesn't really explain much. I've heard this before. I think there are two main issues here. One, people tend to get wound up with their egos in certain ideas, and letting go of those ideas tends to hurt their ego. So let's not let go of, cultural Marxism changed everything, and the Frankfurt School conned the bored Californian housewife into divorcing her husband and taking him for everything he had. Because if we concede we're wrong, then some great catastrophe will be visited upon us. That's one element. Another important element, I think, and this is why, and I'll be talking about the anti-feminists in a bit, why we see so much focus on the political, is the political implies the ability to alter it, right? Something that is political is recognized as being largely superficial. I mean, nobody in his right mind, say take American politics, actually believes that a shift in party, say from a majority Democratic Senate or Congress, or for that matter, presidency, to Republican or vice versa, really has an effect on the fabric of society. There's some changes, sure, but nobody really believes that. And because politics is such a superficial thing and a superficial playground, people posit it because it allows them to get away with the thought that we can all just change this. After all, if cultural Marxism and the Frankfurt School and the quote-unquote left influenced our noble women of the days of yore to turn on their husbands and betray society and civilization, well, all we need to do is shift the political mainstream and the current to something more, conservative or right-wing, and everything will be fine. So essentially, politics allows for one, plausible deniability, both for the ego and for explaining things. They're not very good explanations, but more importantly, it allows people to believe that things can be easily changed. Now, in the year of the fictive figure Jesus Christ, 2016, I think we can all agree, after having studied the subject, people in the MGTOW community, and all the content that's been produced, particularly Colting in recent months, with some of his theories regarding the pill, though there remains much to be explained there, that essentially in the mid-20th century, with the pill, with the confluence of the pill and politics and all of this, however which way you see it, society, modern society, got hit with an avalanche, with a landslide, unprecedented, something that no one had seen prior, because, well, birth control of that sort just didn't exist. The political scene did change, but the question is, what allowed it to change? And this has been talked about ad nauseum, but a mechanized, comfortable environment allowed women to come out of their homes and hearths and participate in society when it used to be too dangerous and they feared for their own safety. But let's just stick with the political, and this is what I hear over and over and over again. And so too is it the case with the anti-feminists. Now, things have changed, of course. Back in the day, in 2011, for example, you'd hear the word anti-feminist, and you'd see the odd video every now and then, but it's an entire genre now. It's an entire market niche, complaining about feminists, opposing feminists, the endless back and forth, saying Anita Sarkeesian is stupid for the 323rd time. All this is part of anti-feminism. So in some sense, I guess that's good. A lot of people think feminism is stupid and feminists are stupid. What has actually changed? Have the unfair criminal penalties inflicted on men And in contrast to women who commit the same crime, has that changed? Has divorce law changed? Has any of that changed? Well, not really. Not at all, in fact. If anything, the reasons for going your own way are just as pressing these days as they were 5 or 6 years ago. And I think ultimately we are going to be stuck, intellectually speaking, in a rut of poor explanations that revolve around the political probably forever, or at least for the foreseeable future. On the other hand, I think some MGTOW content producers have been wise enough to identify other reasons and other causes that go below the superficiality of the political. I mean, we know that there's a human nature. It's why I make videos such as Neolithic hypergamy. It's why I've made videos in the past about identifying universal female behavior in the case of China or South Korea. It's not just about corkscrew theories. And these people can, if they want, spend the rest of their lives lost in that mindset. But they're not helping themselves, and they're certainly not helping the rest of the world. I kind of liken it to something like a town, right, that's been hit by a hurricane. And the people just don't want to accept the fact that it was the hurricane that hit the town and destroyed everything. Instead, they might blame some carpenters that visited it a couple of weeks prior, or some plumbers that messed something up. I mean, rather than saying, yeah, we had a hurricane with massive wind gales and it destroyed everything and there was a storm. I mean, that's essentially what happened with the mechanization effect. It just overwhelmed us, and there was no way to predict what would happen. I mean, for the most part, invention is a kind of mindless activity in as much as it affects society. It's rare that an inventor or somebody who creates some new form of technology, be it medicinal or otherwise, actually thinks about the long-term impact of his creation. It just doesn't really happen. And when it does happen, it can really hit like a landslide or a hurricane. I mean, it's unfortunate because I think, at least in the MGTOW community, we've made a great deal of progress in understanding the fundamentals of human behavior, what drives men and women, and the fact that it's universal, that you can see the same shit going on in India and Indonesia and Brazil and South Korea and China and Canada, the United States. Even in countries, it's posited, for example, that the reason why women divorce so much in the West, particularly in Anglo-American or Anglo-Saxon countries, is the payout. And yet when you look at super equality Scandinavia, where you can't really get a payout and it's hailed as this universal model, what are the stats on it? It's usually always hovering around that 70% mark. That is, more or less 70% of the time women initiate divorce still, in spite of all of that. So there's something else going on, clearly, beyond the mere payout, and Coltrane made a few videos about that. But for the most part, I think MGTOW, certain MGTOW content producers at least, are just light years ahead of the game in that regard. We are pressing ever forward in an effort to understand the world and human beings in the world, and these other people will be forever lost in their corkscrew theories that ultimately explain very little. I mean, they can try to use it to explain things, and for the most part, their ideas tend to be more mainstream, but these are, in some sense, quite literally conspiracy theorists. I'm not necessarily averse to conspiracy theories if they actually explain things, but positing the Frankfurt School as a main motivator or a transformer of society in societies that are, for example, primarily Neo-Confucian, that just doesn't make sense. And yet, at the same time, we see the same behavior in those societies, despite a completely different influx of ideas. So much has changed on the surface level. Superficially, there are a lot more anti-feminists. There are many more people involved in saying feminism is stupid, but then again, a lot of other things have not. Recently saw a video where Teal had the word gynocentrism in the title, and people reacted a bit negatively towards that. They didn't like the word gynocentrism. Alternatively, I had a gentleman a couple of weeks ago comment on an old video MGTOW Talks I had with the professor of evolutionary psychology, Professor Mills, along the lines of, oh, you're just as bad as the feminist. He was accusing Professor Mills of this. So in many ways, we're still stuck where we used to be. But I think for the individual man, for the individual MGTOW-minded man, we have made tremendous strides. Those of us who've taken the time to understand these things rather well. And we have a degree of understanding that was simply lacking 5 years ago because the research and the work hadn't been put into it yet. So we have made tremendous strides, but MGTOW remains very much an individual-minded phenomenon, I think. I don't think it's something for the masses, despite what some people have claimed. And I think the best we can do as either content producers or subscribers or whatever is continue along the path that we have designated for ourselves, which is to say, continually examining human nature, continually looking for the cause and the effect in that nature and how it interacts with the environment, rather than clinging and cleaving to rather absurd ideas that just don't stand the test of time and don't stand the test of universality. I think we, at the very least, can do ourselves a great service. And for those rare people who decide to look in from without, from the outside, they might learn something as well. Let's hope. I think I've had a few of those subscribers in recent months. So I guess, yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But we have made progress, and one can only hope that some of these ideas are further tested, and I will continue to do so on this channel, exploring human nature, trying to find the ultimate cause and effect, and looking for universal patterns in order to understand the basics of our behavior. And with that said, I hope that this has been an interesting recap for you. It's been my observation over the last few years. And if you have any thoughts on this topic, specifically what differentiates, say, then and now, and the ensuing years in between, please leave a comment in the comment section. I'd be happy to read and react and respond to that. So enjoy the rest of your week. Take care, and may Jeebus watch over you. Bye-bye.